On January 20th, South Korea had its first confirmed case of the novel coronavirus, now known as COVID-19, but the severity of the outbreak seems to be quite effectively managed. I went back home to South Korea on March 24th and decided to film the procedures in place to contain the outbreak. Upon arrival, the first thing to catch my attention were signs telling arrivals to download the government app for self-diagnosis and to track whether people were observing their 14-day mandatory quarantine period. The moment people arrive, they undergo mandatory temperature screening to see if there's anyone with an abnormal temperature and is suspected to have COVID-19. Then, people are sent to desks where quarantine officials will ask if they are symptomatic or have been in contact with confirmed cases and take their temperature again. There are separate areas for South Korean nationals and non-nationals. If symptomatic or have been in contact, then they're sent to inspection areas. The civil servants doing the inspection were wearing full PPE and protective gear. They asked if I had any pre-existing conditions that would look like symptoms. We were sent down to a separate testing site on an elevator used by only testees, which were containers with a plastic separator and swabbed through a small hole to minimize contact. All the while, the tester would be in full PPE, and after being tested, we were given N95 masks. I decided to write down some of my observations on my phone after I was sent to sit in a walled-off area. I was told by quarantine officials that I couldn't leave if there was suspicion that I would not comply with mandatory 14 days of self-isolation, and I was informed that this would happen and such procedures were in place. Before entering Korea, I was required to fill out forms for where I'd be staying if I had symptoms and where I'd recently traveled. These forms in the presence of quarantine officials meant that the government had a centralized authority, or the KCDC, to oversee disease control and focus solely on maximizing government policies in that sense. But more so than that, everywhere I looked, workers coming into contact or with the possibility of coming into contact with those that were quarantined were in protective gear. Even airport workers were all wearing protective gear to the point that gloves and masks seemed to be basic. When I finally got my results, which were negative, I was allowed to proceed to immigration after they saw my phone to see if I downloaded the government app. Then they asked for personal details, contact info, and additional contact info to call anyone that could confirm I would be staying in quarantine and keep in contact with. Some people were sent to government facilities to quarantine and be tested. There were a total of 9 facilities all around the country. I asked my friend to send footage of him in one of such facilities. The government was moving people to such facilities on buses separate from public transportation. Now, they've expanded operations to have facilities for non-nationals as well. The diagnosis app made by the government requires daily submissions to check if there are any symptoms, if any, and to track the location of people to ensure that they are complying with quarantine measures for 14 days. After the MERS outbreak in 2015, legislation was passed to make collecting data on individuals easier during epidemics, but there are extra measures in place, such as a government official that will keep in contact and drop in at random times. The government also sends updates on new confirmed cases, specifically the neighborhood and movement route. They quarantine and provide treatment immediately when new confirmed cases do pop up, and if been in contact with a new confirmed case, the government will immediately contact quarantine and test. It may be the efficient healthcare system that allows South Korea to deal with the virus, but it may also be the swift and bureaucratic measures enacted transparently to cope with the outbreak in the country. Even without lockdown measures, why is the outbreak more effectively contained and predicted to be on the decline? Perhaps there need not be such authoritarian measures such as the ones of China to productively deal with COVID-19. There can be ways to democratically go about dealing with the virus. In any case, the current situation demonstrates the high level of bureaucratic efficiency and transparency shown by the South Korean government.